Thank you everyone for attending our regular school board meeting for Evergreen Public Schools, and welcome. And for those of you who would like to join us, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. To start off the meeting, I'll entertain a motion to adopt our board meeting agenda.
We adopt tonight's agenda as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, agenda has been adopted. Next, I'll entertain a motion to approve the board consent agenda.
I move to approve the board consent agenda. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, board consent agenda has been approved. Next, I'll entertain a motion to approve the superintendent's consent agenda.
I move to approve the superintendent's consent agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the superintendent's consent agenda has been approved. Next on the agenda is the superintendent's report. So I turn it over to you, Dr. John Steach.
Okay. Yeah, last Sunday, Derek Brown and Chris McMurray and myself kicked off the keynote, opening keynote presentation of the conference. It was very well received, talking about the different aspects of creating personalized learning environments. So I just want to share with the board that it went really well. This last week, I was excited to attend a candidate forum for our local legislative positions put on by the Heritage High School students. It was very well done, a great event. A couple other board members were there as well. And then just to let you know, next Monday, the Network for Excellence in Washington Schools, which the Evergreen School District has been a part of since its inception, which supported the McClary lawsuit, they're going to be having a regrouping meeting in Federal Way at the Washington Education Association offices, and I plan to go ahead and attend that and see where that organization is going to be headed with lobbying future legislation. And the last thing I have is yesterday, I emailed this to the board, but wanted to share this to the community. We did get our final occupancy permit for Orchards Elementary, so we officially now have full occupancy of the school, which was exciting. Over a decade later.
Oh yeah, that's what I was wondering. It's like, huh?
Yeah, it was because of that access road. We couldn't, until we put the final permanent access road in, they wouldn't give us the permanent. We had a temporary occupancy permit. So we've been using the construction road for over a decade. And we're caught in the middle of a land dispute between two separate property owners that had portions of the easement that we needed to have in order to put in the permanent road, and we were finally able to struggle through all the legal barriers over the last winter and accept a bid and get that project completed. So Sue's smiling back there in the back. We finally can check that one off the list. And hopefully as we go into these future construction projects, we won't have anything that has a temporary occupancy permit anywhere near that long. That's all I've got for tonight.
Hey, thanks, John. Next on the agenda is monitoring district operations, and the first in this section is operations expectation 5, OE5, which is financial planning. And tonight the board has been presented the monitoring report, and we talked about it in workshop the last time we met, but tonight we're here for a first reading. And so for a description of this monitoring report, I turn it over to you, John.
Okay, and you've got a couple of different documents in board docs on this. One is the OE5 interpretation and indicators that we agreed to last year, with the indication that we are in compliance in all areas. There's one that was asterisked, and that's the reason that we brought it back now. We originally brought this to you in August. Mike presented all of the appendices for this. That's what the second document you have actually goes through all the appendices for all 9 sections of OE5 financial planning, giving you the attachments as evidence that we are in compliance. The one area that caused us to bring this back for your review was the 4-year planning outlook. That had to be modified. That's OE5.5. Following the recent negotiations, we had to make some adjustments to that. And so you also have an Excel spreadsheet that's in the board docs that shows you our revised future fund balance projections. For this year, we will maintain the 5% board mandated minimum fund balance, but without either significant revenue adjustments within the next year or some significant expenditure reductions within the next year, or a combination of those two. Our 4-year projected ending fund balance would be down to about $3 million, which would be far less than 1% of our overall budget. So we will be working with the legislature. That's part of the reason I'm going to the news meeting on Monday, is to see what we can do to try to get the legislature to make the adjustments needed to help us bring that back in balance. So, but for 1 year, we are in compliance with our 5%. The policy basically just says we have to have a plan for the 4-year outlook, and we do have a plan, and we're hoping it's the revenue side, not the expenditure side, that we're making the adjustments on. So with that, Mike's here if you have any specific questions on this, but we've gone over this in workshop twice now. And so at this time, I recommend that the board accepts the monitoring reports for OE5 financial planning as presented for first reading, and then move forward for second reading and approval.
Okay, thanks, John. So at this time, I'll open it up to the audience to see if you have any questions or comments about this monitoring report. So it's okay. So seeing no audience questions or comments, we'll close that portion of the discussion, and I'll open it up to the board for a motion.
I recommend the board accepts the monitoring reports for OE5 financial planning as presented for first reading and move them forward for second reading and approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. What comments or questions do we have as a board?
The comment that I have has to do with the future years. We're good for right now, but I am concerned. There's a reason that we have a reserve, and the reserve, the 5% reserve barely gives us a month of operation, running the district with payroll and everything. So I think it's really important that, we need to work on with the legislature about kind of settling some of these weird things that they put upon us with our levy and everything. I do think we don't want to wait too long before we start looking at other things that we might need to make adjustments in, because that's just not an acceptable reserve. And I know none of us, you included, John, are too keen on it.
Right, we want to keep that reserve at 5% of our budget, right? And this goes well below that.
Yeah, especially when we get down there to the year 3, 4, where it really significantly drops off. For the next year or two, it looks manageable. But a lot can happen, as we've seen in a year
Well,
or
next
two.
school year though, right? The deficit's projected to be $9.5 million, right? So that's huge. So, yeah, I guess I can hear what Victoria said. You're saying, Victoria, that you really want to look at, if we're not going to get revenue increases, we need to start looking at expenditure decreases to be able to have next year's budget balance.
Right.
Yep. Any other comments or questions?
And we've started some preliminary discussions on that. What we need is probably 2 months worth of actual expenditures this year to see what those look like compared to budget. That'll give us a better idea. So we'll start doing some planning in December, January, and into February. And then as we start the actual budgeting process, hopefully the legislature will give us some kind of indications of if there's going to be any adjustments at all. Also lets us know what happens in the levy in February. And then so as we get into March and April, we'll actually have to decide which way we're going to go with this.
Okay, any other comments or questions from the board? Okay, seeing none, we'll take a vote because it's been moved and seconded. We'll be voting to accept the monitoring report as presented as a first reading and to bring it forward for a second reading. So all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the first reading, the monitoring report for OE5 has been approved, and we'll be bringing it forward for a second reading at our next board meeting, which is October 23rd. So thank you for that. Next on the agenda is operational expectations policy OE4, which is personnel administration. And we have, as a board, seen the monitoring report at our last workshop, but now we bring it forward for a first reading. And so for a description of this, I also turn it over to you, John.
And again, you've got 3 documents in the board packet. The first of which is the interpretation and indicators that we agreed to along with the policy. And that is noted for this one as compliance with noted exceptions. The reason being, some of these things, by the time we defined what the indicators were going to be for our personnel administration policy, we didn't have the systems in place to collect that data, and we've worked to put those systems in place up to the beginning of the school year. So next year when we bring this report to you, we will have all of those indicators. For the sections that we do have data and information, everything was in compliance, and we have plans on ensuring that everything's going to be in compliance next year. The second document you have is actually the appendix of information, and we had to, for the personnel administration, we did this one a little differently than we did for financial administration, because financial administration, those are all public documents that we're able to give out. Some of the information to prove to the board that we're operating in compliance has personally identifiable information. So the board has one version of an Excel spreadsheet with links that take you to specific HR documents that show things like background checks were performed for hiring processes, that we did reference checks, we have letters of recommendation, all of those things to deal with the hiring process, with training processes, certain things that we wouldn't release in a public information request. So that's why you have an additional document that just the board has access to. What the appendix provides is a description of what those documents are. So for section 4.1, where the board's policy states the superintendent will assure that no person is employed by the district without first clearing through a background inquiries and checks. We gave a list of all employees hired since August 31st of 2017 with the date of hire and the OSPI fingerprints clearance date. And we also gave that same list that includes reference checks that were done. Under 4.2, superintendent will ensure that no volunteer has unsupervised contact with students without first clearing reasonable background inquiries and checks. We provided a current list of all volunteer applications that was updated on 9/5/18, so the board can look at that and see that we have done background checks on our volunteers. 4.3, superintendent will select highly qualified and the best suited candidates for all positions, and the superintendent will take proactive measures towards recruiting diverse candidate pools more closely matched to our student population. So we provided the OSPI item endorsement listing report to show that we are placing highly qualified teachers in positions. We have a classified highly qualified tracker report that we provided. Evergreen School District administrators with their administrative certificates was provided to you. And the previous year's recruiting plan is in process. That was one that by the time we adopted it, we didn't have everything in place for last year. So we'll have that fine-tuned or better tuned for this year to meet the board's expectation. 4.4, superintendent will administer clear personnel rules and procedures for employees. So we provided you a copy of the personnel policies and a copy of the personnel handbook that Janae Gomes and her staff did an amazing job of putting together this year. Janae did an amazing job of putting all of this together. 4.5, superintendent will effectively handle complaints and concerns. We do actually have a new policy on public complaints to the district. So policy 5270, and we have tracked any formal complaints that were filed through that. We will be tracking those this year. Again, that was one that because we didn't have the agreement and the indicator in place at the start of the year last year, you'll be getting that next year. So that's one of those asterisk items. Also, we'll be tracking grievances on this same one as well. Section 4.6, superintendent will maintain adequate job descriptions for all staff positions. We have 484 total job descriptions. 193 of those have been revised since the start of the 17-18 school year, so 40%, which is a pretty amazing number for our HR department to have done in the last year. And they're in the process of going through and revising many more of those. So we kind of did the urgent ones that we were using for postings, and now we're going through and getting all the backlog of the ones that haven't been used in a while but probably should be updated. 4.7, superintendent will protect confidential information. So we provided data sharing agreements, software vetting guidelines, summary of documented district network security software protocols, summary of public record requests, a report of all former employees who have retained access to district network longer than 24 hours, or 48 hours, and the reasoning for the delay. And we did have one data breach that we did provide to the board, that we had an individual who had some PII of students in their car, and their car was broken into, and it was among the information that was stolen. So we are providing ID monitoring and credit monitoring for those students and their families. So. And then 4.8, superintendent will assure that compensation and benefit plans attract and retain the highest quality employees by compensating employees within available resources in a manner consistent with applicable marketplace. So we're working on the revenue expenditure comparison summary for all employee groups. We don't quite have that done yet for doing the comparison for all the groups in the local market. And then we are providing the board with a summary of resignations and hires, indicating that we took more employees from our neighboring districts than we lost to our neighboring districts. And then 4.9, consistent with the superintendent's own evaluation, evaluate all employees' performance according to their contribution toward achieving board results, policies, and in compliance with the operations expectations. So you've been provided evaluation templates for the principals, the AWSP rubrics for building administrators, all the employee evaluation dates for every employee in the district this last year, and the copy of the OSPI required certificated staff evaluation summary from the 17-18 school year. 4.10 is the superintendent will assure that all staff members are qualified, trained to perform the responsibilities assigned to them. We provided you with the online Safe Schools training completion record for all district employees. We provided you the previous year's executed mandatory professional development plan and overview and examples of optional PD programs provided to staff over the last year. And our Safe Schools completion rate was over 97% at the time of this. It was a little bit delayed due to the delay in the start of the school year. We anticipate having 100% very soon. We had to push some of those deadlines for our classified employees. And then on 4.11, superintendent will maintain an organizational culture that positively impacts the ability of staff to reasonably perform their jobs and allows them to work in an environment of professional support and courtesy. That was tied to our panorama staff survey results, and that provided the board with snapshots off of the staff survey feedback that we received. And our discussion in workshop is that the expectation will be that those will be improving or equal to, but no worse than what they were in our baseline year that we just established. And I'm not going to go through all those in detail, they're in the packet. And then the last one, 4.12, superintendent may not retaliate against any employee for initiating a legitimate complaint. That's under policy 5271, which we have in place, and there were no complaints about retaliation in the past year. So that's what we have for monitoring on personnel administration. At this time, I recommend the board accepts the monitoring reports for OE4 personnel administration as presented for first reading, and then move forward for second reading and approval in compliance with noted exceptions.
Okay, thanks, John. At this time, are there any comments or questions from the audience? So seeing none, I call to the board for a motion.
I recommend the board accepts the monitoring reports for OE4 personnel administration as presented for first reading and move them forward for a second reading and approval.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. What questions or comments do we have as a board?
This is one that has a lot of information.
Yeah, a ton.
A lot of data, and so I commend the group in HR that spent all the time putting it together for us. I think for, kind of the first time going through some of the data, and maybe as it evolves throughout the year, we figure out if do we need that much data? Or if there's pieces maybe that we want more information on. But I think that's one of the things that's great about this process, is that we can figure that out as we go. Because there is a lot of information. We have a lot of employees.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's
third
a
largest employer in the county.
Yes.
big organization. It feels to me like it's more data and clearer data than I've seen since being appointed to the board over 4 years ago. And it's really helping me to get a handle on how personnel administration takes place. I really commend the people who put this together with you, and thank you. It's good to see this kind of data. I don't know if it's enough or too much. It feels like a lot, that's for sure, but I like seeing a lot. And I think we can refine it as we go.
And I think our intent is for us to go through and provide you the summary of it, which to tell you that we're in compliance, but then you have the data. If you don't want to just trust us, you can go in and look. And I don't know of any boards in the state that have that type of access to this information to be able to verify the districts being run to their expectations.
Any other comments?
Really good work.
I had a couple of comments, and yeah, I appreciate the work that you've done, John and Janae and the HR department, to put all this together. And I also echo the sentiment as we'll see how this feels about the amount of information. But I had a couple of questions. One's in 4.6 when you talked about job descriptions, and you're talking about like 40% were redone in this last year. Is that pretty typical? Are the job descriptions being redone pretty frequently?
That's a lot more than has been done in the past.
And why is that? Is that because jobs are changing?
It's because we have an outstanding HR director now.
Oh,
I know she's not going to admit to it, but a lot of times it's easy in the hiring process to just say this is close enough, let's just use it, even though it doesn't exactly describe. And as things evolve over the years, the physical requirements may change, and some of the background information may change that you really don't feel compelled to do a complete revision of it or an update, and so people just let it slide. It's not until you make a conscious decision to say we're going to go through the process and we're going to update these, because it's not as simple as just saying I'm going to update the job description. You've got to do a job analysis, a job task analysis, which then creates another document, which then creates the job description to make sure that you really are describing what the person is going to do, both physically and mentally in that position.
okay, thanks. And then the other one was in 4.8, and I realize it's still in process trying to get the information, but when you talk about providing the revenue and expenditure comparison summary of employee groups, compensation, what is that going to look like? That's a comparison of our employees with other districts in certain...
Well, the revenue expenditure comparison summary of employee groups is looking at what do we get from the state and then what are we actually paying.
Okay.
So and part of that is how are we using our levy dollars to
Right.
support which employee groups.
So we'll see that for certificated staff in particular, and then classified staff in particular, and
And
administrative.
because of all the changes, we just didn't get that done.
Okay. Okay, yeah, thanks. Any other comments or questions? Okay, it's been moved and seconded, we've had the discussion, so now we'll take a vote to be able to approve the monitoring report as presented as a first reading. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so it's passed the first reading, and we'll bring it forward for a second reading at our next board meeting on October 23rd. Next on our agenda is board comments. So do we have any board comments? None? Is that correct? I just wanted to make sure.
Well, we had our Region 6 WASDA meeting.
Yeah.
And received there some support reports by WASDA and the state board representative and a couple of other entities, which really, I guess, drove home the notion that this idea of career pathways that we've been developing and that you've been driving, John, are gaining speed. Some of that came into the discussion the other night at the political forum as well, as we were talking to this or that political candidate or office holder. So I'm excited to see how much progress we can actually make over the next year legislatively for that. It's good to see that.
And I think as John mentioned before, Rob and I did attend the candidates forum done at Heritage High School by the government, AP government class of Darcy Haverhill over at Heritage High School. And it was really impressive. The kids are very engaged in the political process. They were excited and they gave those candidates a run for their money. So it was kind of fun to watch. And then of course Ginny and I had the ECS golf tournament that we did for citizens for schools. That was fun.
It wasn't raining.
It was nice weather. Yeah, a little cold.
It was cold.
I think really,
How many students were at that Heritage High School event, approximately?
You know, there was, well, I think that it was intended by the whole class. The moderator was a student in the classroom. He did a really nice job. And then there was other students and other families that came to the event. I would say it was pretty well attended overall. I don't know, what would you say, about 50 students maybe total, or?
I want to say about 50 students and about that many adults, 100, 150 people all told.
And they all took the time too, prior to it. They had kind of a reception in the lobby and they had one afterwards, but all the students took the time really to go around the room and interact with all of the candidates at their individual tables and kind of be able to ask individual questions, because some of them, when they went to, it was the only candidates forum that I've seen where there was like, they didn't get the questions ahead, it was just the students went up there and asked. And but some of them would say like, oh, when we were talking before, so they based their questions on conversations that they had had prior to the event. So it was really interesting to see.
Yeah, that's good.
I did have.
Oh, go ahead.
I think it was Julie and I were at the Council for the Homeless lunch, and it was really interesting, the supports that they have in place for our, for the community, for people who are in a predicament and need some assistance finding a place to live. And I was impressed with the system that they've got in place.
That following weekend, I was actually at the Shares Soup On event, and it's interesting how all of those agencies are working together and how many of them are supporting our kids in our schools too. And we're relying on those government agencies to help us out, and those nonprofits to help support our kids. So it's nice to see people in the community come together to raise some money for that.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Rob.
it was last Tuesday. I took a chance, or an opportunity rather, to go and review the FLASH curriculum, the Human Growth and Development Parent Preview nights that were held a couple nights last week, and I don't know if there's another one scheduled, but I was very impressed with the presentation style. They held an open house kind of thing, let parents read all the documents and the curriculum that they wanted to. They showed the videos that are shown to the 4th and 5th graders. The translators were there so that Spanish and Russian and Ukrainian speaking people could understand what they were seeing. And the room was packed. They were well organized, and I really want to commend, I can't remember any of the staffers' names there. It was Vicki Caverness's department, right? At the depth of organization and the ease with which they answered every question that any parent posed to them. It was a good event.
Okay, thanks. Anything else? I just wanted to say that, yeah, I went with Rob to the Wausau Region 6 meeting on September 26th, and it was at Woodland High School. It was really nice to see the new Woodland High School. But it was even better to be able to share experiences with our, fellow school board directors in the area. So it was a really good meeting. So I guess we'll go on to the next part of our agenda, which is future agenda items. Do we have any to bring up, board members? Okay. No new future agenda items to bring up. Next on our agenda is citizens' comments. So this is a time where people in the audience can address the board for 3 minutes on any item except anything related to personnel or legal matters. Do we have anyone that would like to step forward and address the board?
There's nobody signed up.
No one signed up. Okay. Well, I guess we will be going into recess to sign some papers. Afterwards, we will be reconvening in a board workshop across the hall, and we'll be going over the monitoring report for policy R2, which is academic achievement. We'll also be going over the monitoring report for operational expectation 3, OE3, which is treatment of community stakeholders. We'll be talking about an elementary school update on schematic designs of the elementary schools. We'll have a discussion about the levy. We'll have a board meeting debrief. We'll have a legislative update as well as a superintendent's update. Until then, we are now in recess.